want to know which planet was causing your suffering? How about Earth?
Hey everyone, Brandflex here, back with a new Duelists of Eden video. For today's video, we're going to go backwards in the evolution of the spell series again and talk about Vivisection. Vivisection as a card is super complex and super wonky, so it's actually a card that deserves just a video solely dedicated to itself because there's a lot of weird rules, there's a lot of interesting movement you can do with it, and it's a card that is pretty interesting. I won't say it's a good card. It's just a very weird card, and it's a very versatile card, but you do have to understand it very, very well to even get the bare minimum usage out of it, and then you have to really practice it to continue pushing it further and further. So I'll just leave you guys a lot of grief when you play the game yourself and try to learn Vivisection because it can be very, very overwhelming. So with all that said, Vivisection is going to be a 1-mana spell that summons 5 knives, or 5 knives, it does 5 damage, my bad. It summons 3 knives behind you at a certain interval, and these knives can do friendly fire. So if you cast it and you don't move, you can hit yourself, or if you cast it and you don't move out of the way of any of them, like you can even run back into it, right? Like this spell has a lot of friendly fire, and obviously the point of Duelists of Eden is to murder your opponent, and Vivisection has the quirk of being able to, stab yourself with the cards. And if you use it with step spells, you want to be even more careful, because if you use Vivisection and then step, there is a pretty good chance that you just stunlock yourself, or you even just deal 15 damage yourself as well. You can see there that I managed to do 15 damage. So at a very, very basic level, Vivisection has one use, and that is acting as a discount salvo. If you guys don't know what salvo is, it's a 3-mana spell that does 8 damage in all 4 rows. It's basically a very basic pressure card that is kind of overwhelming for new players at the start, but once that you get better at the game, you can learn how to walk through them, dodge through them, shield them, and Vivisection functions very similarly at a much lower cost, and it does require you to move. So you can see here I'm imitating salvo, and you can see that if I walk too fast, the last knife can spawn at the very bottom. So yeah, be very, very careful when you're trying to do the salvo play, because if you walk at a certain interval, like you can see there that I walked at a kind of not quite frame input perfect pace, I can get the knives all spawn. But if I run too fast, then I can accidentally hit myself at the very top. So even when you're just doing these row hits, you want to really make sure that you're paying attention to where your knives spawn, because sometimes if you miss the last frame perfect input, you might walk back up assuming that you're dodging something and then you run into it anyways. So it's a very useful spell for this specifically, because your opponent has to walk up and down. They either have to walk all the way up into the safe spot that you've created, which is obviously a very good place for projectiles, or they have to shield the Vivi, dodge the Vivi, or just learn the pattern themselves and walk up through it themselves on the other end, which is totally possible, but a lot more rare because Vivi is not a super popular card. It is slowly becoming more and more played, but it's nothing that's like insanely common at the moment, even now. So that is the most basic use of Vivi. The other use of Vivi you can use is to run forward with it. And that way, if you're really expecting your opponent to not punch you for running forward, you can surprise them with 15 damage very easily. And this obviously has a lot of lag with it. You can follow it up with a lot of spells. It's a very high risk play because you might run straight into your opponent. And you saw earlier that if you run all the way forward with it, you might take 10 damage. So let's say that I'm running to the Shiso and he shoots me in the face, then I want to take 10 damage for my efforts. And again, very high risk, but if he for some reason runs into it, then you're doing 15 damage to him. So very scary card in that regard for the user and the enemy. So that's a very, very basic Vivi stuff out of the way, because these two movements, for the most part, you can't really go wrong with using Vivi this way. Again, you do have to be kind of careful with the up and down movement because it can be pretty quick, but if you just use Vivi like this, it will be a pretty mediocre card, but it will serve you a very good purpose. Now, the other ways you can use Vivi, this is going to be the intermediate movement combos with Vivi, is that you can actually walk backwards into the knives, because the summon animation for Vivi, it doesn't actually create an active hitbox until the knife starts flying forward. So if we hit these step by step, you can see the knife spinning. So while the knife is spinning, it is intangible, but the moment it becomes an actual line, that's when it becomes tangible, and that's when it can hit you. So you can see that if you wait at all, you will end up being hit because of the lag time, but if you frame perfect input a backwards walk and then another walk, then you actually clear the Vivi, and that's what lets you walk all the way back, because if you walk fast enough, doing double tap and doing the movement double tap lets you walk into the spawning first Vivi, and then by the time you walk into the next backwards tile, the other Vivi is still spawning behind you, but you've already cleared the first Vivi you sent, so it lets you do a very quick movement where you can actually summon all 3 knives in the same place if you just run backwards quickly enough. And then, you know, let the third one spawn in and then walk down, because you saw that if you go too fast, you can actually spawn the last Vivi on you, which can be a good mix-up, because if you're, again, really used to the movement, you can move up and down quite easily. But again, you have to really pay attention to where your knife spawns, because you can see in here, I'm not quite going up fast enough. So again, very high risk card. But if you are very confident in the movement, you can really confuse your opponent, because you can vary, like, you know, the vertical movement, you can vary the last hit, which might confuse your opponent, and then you can hit them with this other spell. You can kind of fake out the movement down. You can even just do like little movements like this, or you can even like walk up and down the same space and try and push your opponent for, you know, dodging or shielding the VV. And there's a lot of movements like that. So you can see, like, you know, you can walk in and out if you're confident in your own VV usage. Like, this is always a thing. You can do it the same way here. But just in general, if you're trying to kind of quote-unquote frame your trap yourself into getting VV effectively, then you can always buffer the backwards movement. And that will almost always give you the, that'll always give you the first knife to go where you want, or the first 2 knives to go where you want. There's almost no way to movement input. If you walk backwards, there's almost no way to get the second knife somewhere else. So if you want to like get 2 knives up in the top and the one knife in the bottom, then you just press VV, buffer back, and then immediately go down, and then that way you can get all the knives out, or 2 knives out in that row. And obviously don't walk down too quickly, because you will counter yourself, but it's just a very good way to surprise your opponent if they're not expecting it. And then the last way you can get the other pattern, the very advanced movement pattern with VV, is to buffer up and back. So do 2 movement input or frame perfect movement inputs in a row, which is going to be walk up, walk back, and then down, or it's like 3, I think. So you see here that you can alternate the knives, which again can be very trippy. Whether or not it actually matters that much is kind of up to debate, because I haven't really used this in real game, because it is kind of, you know, it's like a genuinely, why would I do this input instead of the much easier backwards walk input? But it's just something you should know about, because VV, again, is a very weird spell in that you can move in a lot of directions, and you can really confuse your opponent with the movement, and you can force your opponent to respect all the patterns you can do. But you have to be super aware, and you always have to remember that your opponent can always counter you while you're casting VVs. So you don't want to get too tripped up in how you're going to make the VV pattern. You can just stick to the up and down movement. Just be aware that if you only use this VV and this VV, you can be really predictable, and you might not get as much mileage as someone who is comfortable going for the, you know, 2-row VVs, or maybe like the force, like the alternate, or the missing column VV. I don't know what to call it, but you know what I mean. So after 8 minutes straight of talking about VV movement, we can talk about the other part of VV, which I probably should have talked about way sooner, because I'm pretty sure everyone would have hopped off this video by now. But this part of VV is the much more interesting part of VV. So Vivisection obviously has a very, very low recovery, which means that you can move or act 3 frames after you cast it. And so what that means is that if your spell after VV is fast enough, you can actually act afterwards. So kunai, for example, you can actually press VV, and then you can kind of do the multi-input, or you can hold the inputs together. So I'll turn on the input history for that. You can see there that even though I press the buttons together, they both cast. And then obviously the input history will show you which button I kind of press first after I let go. But that's a really good way to cast VV at the same time, or buffer the next spell as quickly as possible after VV if you're not moving. If you are moving, then the game is pretty weird, because it doesn't save anything but the latest buffer you do. So let's say that I'm trying to walk and then do like VV kunai. If I walk too fast and then VV kunai, you'll notice that only kunai shows up, even though I'm pressing both at the same time. I have to walk and then wait for the walk animation to finish, and then VV kunai comes out. And just now you saw that I can actually VV kunai and walk. And that's because if your spell has a low enough frame data, you can actually walk out of the way before the VV knife spawns and hits you. And the frame data requirement for that is going to be, I believe, 15. So you can sort by recovery. We can see that Snowball is going to be the easiest one. If I can VV Snowball and then walk, you can see that it counters me. So it's actually 15 and below. There's only one spell in the game that is a 15 recovery, and that is Queen's second ability. So every spell that you can use with this is going to be like Kunai and below, like Mine, Lasso, Rage. Like there's a lot of spells that do have 14 recovery. So you can see that I'm gonna take Vortex. Like just to prove my point, I can take Vortex, Shotgun, Guillotine. If I do VV into that input, then I'll be able to move out every time, or I should be able to move out every time. It's awkward. It's 13 and below. Well, guess I have to remake this. Wait, really? It's actually really weird. I didn't realize. Huh. Why does Vortex do that? That is really weird. I am finding out now for the first time. I feel like this happens every video that I'm like very confident in the frame data, but for some reason the spells like don't work the way I think they do. That is really weird. I guess it's because there's active frames? I don't know. But it's not startup because Guillotine is a longer startup than Vortex, so Vortex is just worse? Sorry, not to go check. Yeah, Lasso too. Lasso also doesn't let you walk out in time, but Punch Cannon, and I'm assuming Rage do. Okay, and kids, this is always why you test the interactions, because you can't trust all the frame data for some reason. So it looks like if you throw an object that has to spawn, if you lob an object that has to spawn, it doesn't work, but projectiles are fine. So that means mine doesn't work either then, huh? Interesting. How weird. Okay, we'll consider that as a lesson. Anything that is a fast cast or projectile, 14 or less, will be fine. But if it's a summon, like Rage, Vortex, then you actually do have to dodge. So this leads very well to the next point. If the recovery is between apparently 14 on some spells, but 16 to around 19, I believe. We'll check with Bouncing Blade really quickly. Then what you have to do is you have to dodge. Oh yes, between 18. So 19 doesn't work. If your spell has anywhere between a 16 to an 18 recovery, then what you can do is you can, obviously, if you cast the spells and you walk, you'll get countered. But it's actually enough time for you to buffer a dodge afterwards. So you can actually use this to do some really cheap combos. So like with Paragon, you can see that for 4 mana, I deal 23 damage, which is pretty good. And this is important because some characters like Saffron, they have recovery that falls within that range. So I can do VVW1 and then dodge, and that gives me a very, like, obviously I can just do this run backwards and forwards. But because Saffron's weapon is so fast, you can actually catch people off guard. Again, 3 mana for 17 damage isn't the best, and it's a very high risk, it's a very high investment spell cast, but you can catch people off guard. Again, this is another option you have when it comes to applying pressure with Vivisection. And then, unfortunately, once you go past that 18 mark, like you saw with Bouncing Blade, you can no longer do these techs. You can technically shield, but then the question is, like, why would you shield Vivisection and then, you know, either take the damage or, yeah. It's like a very, like, yeah, you can shield it, but why would you shield it? It's 15 damage. That's going to either deal 10 shield damage into 5 damage or just shield break you. So don't do that one. And so the last thing that we can talk about with Vivisection is going to be, not the last thing, but the other combo we can talk about with Vivisection is going to be the steps. Now, steps with Vivisection are going to be very interesting because I just realized I didn't talk about this other part. So, okay, I'll just this video is already a mess, but it's fine. So Vivisection, again, obviously when you walk, the knives spawn in a sequence. So it's important to know that another thing with Vivisection is that because of how the spawning works, like the first 3 frames you have for the first knife, the first 3 frames you're locked in place, right? So those 3 frames don't apply to the rest of the VV knives you summon, because obviously you aren't locked to the first 3 frames of casting. So obviously I showed earlier that if I do Saffron, or I didn't show, but if I do Saffron Vivisection with W1, I can't walk out. But if I were to cast Vivisection, walk up immediately, cast W1, and then walk away immediately, then suddenly I can walk out of the range in time because I wasn't locked out. Unfortunately, this is a very difficult input to do. If you're a little off, then you can actually get countered as you walk away. I'm not really sure what the condition is still, because it's like really... It's really hard. I could probably force myself to make the error if I try this inverter combo, because inverter does combo pretty well with Vivisection. So it's like, yeah, you can see that I'm trying to do inputs really fast. So yeah, so you can see here that I missed the combo on inverter. This is the stuff I lab when I'm bored instead of playing ranked. You see, yeah, so you see there that I managed to counter myself, even though I did the Vivi walk tech. So you want to be careful. Obviously, it's definitely possible. You can see them managing to do it here, and I'm doing 24 damage when I do it perfectly. There's obviously a little delay because you have to be really fast with this, and that's the reason why I'm walking down a lot. But yeah, it's something you should be aware of because, again, kunai, it's a lot easier to do it with kunai because kunai has less recovery, so you can just walk out much more easily. Stuff like Saffron's W1 has a slightly long recovery, which means that you can accidentally tag yourself with the Vivi as you walk down. It's just a very odd timing again because we're not working with perfect science. Like you can see there, I hit myself even though I feel like it was about on time. See that I hit myself again. But this, again, applies to a lot of other Vivi techs. Like I showed you the walk back Vivi. You can do walk back, walk up, and then use W1, and that covers a lot of the middle columns if people are using steps. So you can pressure steps really well. And so again, not saying this isn't perfect, like this doesn't make Vivisection perfect by any means. Like Vivisection is still a very conditional spell with pressure, but you can make ways to make Vivisection just that much scarier that your opponent might not know about because the spell is so underexplored. So going back to step spells, which I was going to go earlier, is that Vivisection also is very weird with steps. So once again, with step spells, you can use Vivi in steps, and then you can walk forward, and then you can hit both your ally or both your enemy and yourself, which is a very funny thing. You see that we both took 5 damage for some reason, which I think you can even code it to do 15 damage to both of you. You can see that both take 10. But obviously, if you walk past, you can get your opponent to take all 15. But yeah, so there's that. You can also use Vivisection after you step, and then that lets you do very quirky things like with Saffron. If you off angle the step, you can this is so much APM. You can step, Vivisection, walk up, W1, and then because you're traveling diagonally and you're forced to return, you'll actually dodge the next 2 Vivis that your opponent will be hit by, so you end up doing 60 damage for 2 mana, which is very, very good. Auto slash obviously doesn't get that that off angle aspect unless they hit step it. So instead what you can do is you can do a very similar idea. You can do what I showed earlier with the VVW1 dodge. So you can do auto slash VVW1 dodge, and then you can go backwards. You can even just do auto slash VVW1 walk down, I think. Let me see. You can't because you're forced backwards. So you can do oh yeah, what it was you can do auto slash into VV walk W1 dodge, which is another way of doing the auto slash W1 dodge thing I showed earlier, but because it's kind of hard to it's a bit hard for me to do that in real games, so this is like the other way that I do it, because VV is one of those spells that has such a low recovery that you can cheese out the third action in a step spell. Like, keep in mind that I've prattled on about how you can only do 2 things in a step spell. You can either walk once, then a spell, do 2 spells for the most part, or walk twice. Vivisection is one of the only things that you can do that lets you do a movement and 2 spells, which is, again, very niche, but very, very possible to do. And it's just very funny looking. So, yeah. There's also, with all slash, you can VV first and then do all slash. And then that way you can just move afterwards. And so that's a thing. You can always do VV all slash. You can do all slash VV walk, just to make it easier on yourself. It won't be a true combo, but it will just be more pressure your opponent has to pay attention to, because they still have to dodge. Like, they're actionable, but they do have to avoid the knives, which sometimes gets people off guard because they don't expect the knives to come out. And yeah, I think that is pretty much it for Vivi for the spells. Now, again, there are some very specific character interactions with Vivisection. So I showed, for example, with Saffron, because you have 17 recovery, you can do the Vivisection into Sparkler into Dodge. You can't do that with Spartex because it's a 25 recovery. Selicy has the only version of Vivisection that doesn't require you to do some weird tech, but still guarantees the 15 damage. So if your opponent is on the first or second column, then what you can do is you can auto slash, cast Vivisection, and then W1 through your opponent. And you can see that it's actually not true combo, I think, because of how which one was it? No, it's auto slash W1 and then VV, because the VV will spawn on top of them. So yeah, it's auto slash W1 VV. And you can see that because auto slash centers you on top of your opponent, and then W1 brings you one step behind your opponent, VV will spawn on top of your opponent, which they can't avoid because they're in hit stun the entire time. And then because your opponent tanks all of the daggers for you, you're ironically safe from the daggers returning and hitting you. And so the combo that I was incorrectly doing a second ago, which is auto slash VVW1, there is a 7 gap, so your opponent can actually walk out in time. So you want to make sure that you're doing the combo properly, which is again auto slash W1 Vivisection. And that's a very, very powerful application of VV. It's probably the only application of VV that is easy to do and gets you full value. Now it's important to note that you cannot do that if your opponent's on the 3rd or 4th column, because if you do that, you're going to hit both of you. You're going to hit yourself rather, because you're forced backwards. So when they're on the 3rd and 4th column, then you have to do the thing I talked about earlier, which is auto slash VVW1. And then that's now true because that's not true, I think, because you hit the opponent faster because you ram your head against the wall. I don't actually know the physics to it, but again, if your opponent is in the first 2 columns, the combo is going to be auto slash W1 Vivisection. And if your opponent is in the 3rd or 4th column, then it's going to be auto slash Vivisection W1. And you have to be really fast about it, or else you might do what I did and hit yourself. And you might want to walk out of the way just in case. So yeah, very, very funny things going on with Vivisection for Selicy, but she is also a very decent user of it. And what Vivisection does, it does fill a hole where Selicy usually doesn't want projectiles, and it provides her decent projectiles, which lets the opponent have to respond to something that's not her using steps, and is also a pretty good payoff for that. And so just to go through the list, you know, obviously Hazel can do the W1 walk, or the Vivisection spell walk. It's a little less good because obviously W2 pushes people out, so it's like, yeah, you can do it, but is it really a point? Because you're gonna have to like BBW2 and then walk up, but then your BBs do nothing because your opponent is like stuck there. So what it can be useful for is if your opponent dodges and doesn't move up to the dodge, and you just catch them with that instead. And obviously wrench is a thing. You can do BBW1 wrench, and then that's gonna be a true combo, but it's a little, or it's not a true combo, you have to, because of them being knocked backwards one. Let's see, it's a gap 1, so they'll get hit by 1 knife, but not the rest of the knives. And then if you guys have other characters you want to experiment with Vivisection on, then you'll just know that, again, if the recovery is less than 14 and you're not throwing an object, you can walk out of it. If it's between 16 to 18, you have to input a dodge after it, and the recovery is any higher than that, then there's no funny Vivi tech unless you do the Vivi walk, cast immediately, buffer walk out, in which case I think the recovery is like 24 or something. So super rambly video. I don't really know how good this video is going to be, but if you were curious about Vivisection, that is all the information I can give you. Hopefully it saves you guys hours of time of labbing and testing and gives you guys ideas with your character. Like, just for example, Gunner has a really funny interaction with Vivi, because Gunner has his W2, Gunner's W2 does have some pretty severe lag to it. But because of the property of where you're clearing the Vivisection as you run back, you can see that, yeah, you just, yeah, you can see there that I don't have to actually dodge or walk. I just walk out of the last one. You can see how that works like that. Like, it's a very good way for Gunner to just get more benefit out of his W2, and also lets you follow up with your W1 or any other spells afterwards, as you can see here. And unfortunately, Gunner's W1 doesn't let you dodge because the recovery is too long, but again, his W2 does let you do some shenanigans. So just be aware of that if you're playing Gunner. I know a lot of Gunner players like Vivisection because he has a thing that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video where you can cover 3 columns and then use W1 to punish them going to the safe row. But obviously W2 is also a direct synergy just like it is with Selicy. So yeah, long video. Hopefully it was helpful. If this video does well somehow, just let me know if you want more of these like very nerdy rants about the game, because I've been trying to veer away from these because the videos are super long and I don't know how enjoyable they are. But just let me know how it is. Have a good day or night wherever you are. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.